Here we go. So thank you for joining me. I have a bit of a plan for today, but mostly it's going to be flexible depending on what conversations pop up. But what I want to start off by telling you is just a little bit about why I'm geeking out on the topic of health in general and brain health in particular. And I'll tell you first that I am someone that has always loved food. I continue to absolutely love food. I love getting together with people to eat. I love the way that there's so many traditions around food. I love the pleasure of eating food. And I love the feeling of feeling full. I love it when people cook for me. And I've also come to learn to cook myself, even though that's not something that I've always enjoyed. But I have to admit that there was a point in my life where I loved food so much that I was actually, and this is a little embarrassing, I was actually judgmental of people who I considered to be picky eaters, because I had grown up with this idea that if you're offered any food, you should accept it all the time, no matter what it is. And you should be grateful for it. And, you know, I was raised by someone who was raised by war, in a war situation and in a lot of scarcity. And so there's that idea that you better just eat whatever is available to you. So that's always been very strong for me. But then my mother died of cancer when I was only 9 years old, and she was 39 years old. So that started making me be more conscious about health, and then learning later on that 80% of cancers are actually preventable through lifestyle made me become more aware of what kind of lifestyle am I choosing. And I was like, I always had this like voice inside of me that told me that I didn't have much of a chance of living past 39, for like no logic in that at all, but just because of the experience that I had as a child, and because my dad had also lost his dad when his dad was 39 and my dad was 9. So it's this like generational coincidence of becoming 9 years old, losing a 39-year-old parent. And my son, interestingly enough, was also turning 9 at the same time that I was turning 39. This is a number of years ago now. So I was paranoid. I was totally paranoid. So it's out of that fear that I started becoming interested in health and nutrition. And I've been learning so much. Now I'm past that hump. I'm no longer afraid. and I've learned so much that I'm way healthier than I've ever been, even though I have always made relatively healthy choices. There is so much that we can do. There's so much that's in our power and in our control to be aging and avoiding disease, chronic illness, and to age with like a really healthy brain is something that's become very important to me. And so I want to share everything that I've been learning. So that's basically what has brought me to doing this. And I've been, anyways, I don't want to talk too much because I'm not usually the kind of person that takes up space talking. I usually ask questions and like to hear everyone else talk. So we are going to do that. But I want you to know that I'm not a total expert on the subject by any means, but I have been doing quite a lot of studying. I've been taking some courses. I've become certified as a coach using a specific approach to nutrition and helping people with their relationship to food. And because I'm so interested in the topic, I'm constantly immersed in it and constantly reading clinical trials and reading and listening to interviews with doctors and with other experts, and just like also comparing different approaches and that kind of thing. So that's just a little bit of an intro. So now I just want to see who wants to share. I want to ask you to think of the last time, or the most recent time, because it wouldn't be the most recent time that you felt like your brain was functioning at its best, and you were full on, you were in flow, and you were just you felt like all your cognitive abilities were present with you, your memory was top notch. Who wants to share what that was like, and when, and how recent was that, and what was the context?
Hi, Jenny, it's Allison. Can you hear me?
Yes, Allison, and then Beth will go.
Okay. I've just, it was yesterday that I was helping somebody edit a Zoom talk that she was going to be giving. And for some reason, I just plugged straight into it. I could see so clearly where there were issues, where things weren't flowing, and I could just get into it so quickly and sharply, and I felt great about it.
So nice. Such a nice feeling, right?
And I knew that I was being helpful, and I learned a lot by doing it as well.
And what do you have a sense of what helped you be in that really good state? What made it
Um,
possible?
I really wanted to help the person because I admire the person so much, and I felt honored that I was asked to do this.
So something was important to you.
Yeah, yeah.
Nice, nice. Beth, what were you going to share?
I hope this wasn't the last time, but this is the strongest memory of it. It was when I had gone back to school. So it's got to be like 20 years ago. And I was sitting in a poli-sci class, and I just remember feeling like I had this imagery of just opening my head and just like all of this information is pouring in, and it's like hitting all of the right spots and chunking in the right places. I was just like, I was getting it, and I was just so glad that I was in an education situation where I could be feeding that part of me.
Very nice. And what do you think helped make that possible for you? Having that feeling.
I think because that was my goal at the time. Was I was a student, so I was focused on studenty things, and I was able to be student engaged and in that learning. And that wasn't my my kids were at that point by then all in school, so like I was just, this is what I could focus on, and I had permission.
Nice, nice. You had permission to make that the priority, it sounds like. And the interest, not just the permission, the interest. Awesome. Very good. Anyone else? Yes, Steve.
I thought I would relate it to food the last time I had a cup of coffee, caffeinated coffee, because it make me go crazy. But it was actually, I get together with Andre DeZanger and also Wayne Fisher, and we have a Zoom or GoToMeeting discussion every 2 weeks on various topics, all creative topics. And when I'm with those guys, and my wife, when I come off the call after about an hour or so, she says, "How was it?" I said, "I am high as a kite. I couldn't be more excited." And the reason why is because the two of us, actually the three of us, enjoy each other's company. We can wonder together, and we are forgiving. We just play. It's a yes and, as Beth, I think all of us can realize. It's yes and rather than but. It's always a yes and that I get. Couldn't get it from drugs, never did drugs, but I get high on life, creativity, that's it.
Very nice. Yes, and that definitely feeds our brains, right? Because it's not just food that feeds our brains. It's our interests, it's the social connections that we have, it's maintaining those social connections, it's the topics that interest us, and it's the being able to use our capacity to the max. So there's a few things that I want to share before I ask you some more questions. And it's that brain health, we all know how important it is in theory, right? We know that aging and keeping our brain at its best is important. Again, we know this in theory, but we don't always do what's best for it. So it's common sense, but it's not common practice. And it's not common practice because often people don't know what is best to do for the brain and to keep it aging at its best. So I can tell you that there's three main things that you absolutely need to do. The first one is just love your brain. And that makes you prioritize it, right? Yes, thank you, Beth. Give it some affection and some love. It's housed inside of here, and it's extremely powerful and extremely important to our happiness and our well-being, not just to our cognitive abilities, but our mental health as well, right? Which really impacts the quality of our life. And in Canada, I don't know the statistics in the US, but I'm sure it's very similar in the US, and it might even be a little higher in the US. But in Canada, the statistic right now is that there's an expectation that there's going to be a 60% increase in the number of people with dementia within the next 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very high and it's very serious, and it's totally preventable. That's the part that most people don't know. A lot of people think it's genetics or that it's just a normal part of aging and that it just comes along with aging. It does not need to come along with aging. It is preventable, and you can start preventing it at any age. All of this is fact. So loving your brain, number one, because when you prioritize it, you're going to make decisions that are good for it. And I like to use the metaphor of houseplants. Personally, I don't take very good care of my houseplants. And I admit that it's because I just don't prioritize them. I have 4 kids. I have a business. I need to take care of myself. I like having an organized household. I like having it relatively clean. The plants end up being the last priority. And so I have a pot I have actually more than one pot, but one of them in particular where the plant has been dead for 2 months, unfortunately. And the pot still sits there. That's how little I prioritize taking care of my plants. And it's true for some of us in terms of our brain as well. If you don't prioritize it, you're not going to take care of it. So prioritizing it is number one. And then it's knowing what is good for it so that you can give it more of what's good for it, and knowing what's bad for it so that you can stop doing the things that are bad for it. So those 3 things, it's that simple. Now, in terms of what's good for it and what's not good for it, I want to start by asking you who maybe we have 8 people on the call. We can speak out, yeah? You can just put out your hand and I'll call you out rather than using the chat box. So who wants to tell me what they think, just based on what you've read, what you've heard, what you know, what's bad for the brain? What's bad for your brain health? Yes,
No,
Beth Lautenschläger. Sorry if I'm completely
No, you
mispronouncing
did
your
very well there. It's a tough one. It's Lautenschläger.
Lautenschläger.
I think the first 2 things that could pop into my mind when you ask a question like that would be sugar and alcohol.
And do you know why?
I don't actually. I don't know what it is that I believe it, and I practice cutting sugar right out of my diet, and I'm not much of a drinker for those reasons, but I don't really know why or what they do now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anybody else on the call? So sugar, put up your hand if you also knew that sugar and alcohol are pretty much terrible for the brain. Okay, most of you. And put up your hand if you love alcohol or love sugar. So you're one or the other, or maybe both. And that's perfectly natural. Our brains are wired to love sugar, and alcohol has the same effect as sugar. In fact, sugar has the same effect as alcohol on the brain. The only difference, and the way we metabolize it, leads to exactly the same reactions in the brain. The only difference is that the way we metabolize sugar doesn't lead to us looking drunk. And so it's not as obvious that it's bad for us. Whereas you wouldn't give alcohol to a child because everyone knows that alcohol is bad for our brains. But we do give sugar to our children very easily and very frequently. And it creates an addiction. Just like alcohol becomes addictive, sugar becomes just as addictive because it creates a dopamine reaction in the brain, which makes us wanting more, which makes us dependent on it. But there's a whole other list of reasons why sugar and alcohol are not good for our brains, because they constrict blood flow to our brains. And over time, that kills cells. So the cells start to die off in order to maintain efficiency. The brain needs to be a super highly efficient organ. And it takes, do I remember the statistic? I believe it's 80% of the body's energy is consumed by the brain. So it requires a lot of energy. Now, I want to ask you, or someone else, does someone else have knows or want to say one or two other things that are not good for the brain that you know you should have less of? Beth Sladak?
Well, I don't know less of, actually more
Lasak.
like inactivity is bad for the brain, where activity is good for the brain. So doing physical activity and even just like putting yourself in new surroundings or driving a new way home, those are things that are good for the brain.
Exactly, because it keeps it active, it keeps it making connections, it keeps those cells being necessary, and if they're necessary, then they kept being fed. If something in the body becomes irrelevant and the body says, well, we're not using this, we're not going to drive energy towards it, then it will die away. So that's exactly right. And table tennis, of all things, is a fantastic sport for the brain. Who would have known, eh? It's a great one. But also, yeah, also going for a walk, and walking high speed is better because it increases the blood flow to your whole body. So walking like you're late everywhere you go is a good thing. Now, let me ask you, let's go back to the either sugar or alcohol. So what is one food, just someone say, what is a food that you really love and that you know is not that good for you, but you love it? Chocolate. Allison.
Chocolate.
Who else?
Chocolate.
Yeah, everyone, lots of you are nodding for chocolate. Okay. Now, there's different types of chocolate, of course. And so you could put chocolate on a spectrum of really bad for your health in general and not so bad for your health. So the really dark chocolate, no sugar added, you could say that it's not so bad for you. And it can even have some antioxidant effects, which could be good for the aging of your brain, but you still don't want to have dark chocolate on a regular basis. And obviously the really, like, those Kinder eggs full of milk chocolate and all kinds of additives and sugar, and it's barely even chocolate at all, that would be the one that's worst. But what I want to ask you, because the point and what I'm most interested in, and this is why I love having these conversations with people, it's that most people know what's good for them and what's not good for them. The trouble is that we also want to enjoy life. And so the question is, how do we get to enjoy life and enjoy food? And I have to repeat this, I love food. How do we do this while prioritizing our brain health and our health in general? This is the question that most interests me. And so I want to ask you, who wants to offer to speak a little bit?
I cannot.
Yes, Marlies. Is that right, Marlies?
Marlies, yeah. Hi. Yeah, I think for me, if I look at the French model of eating, and I've worked in the food industry for my whole life, so just to put that out there.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and when I was with my French colleagues, they were all these absolutely petite little people, and I've never seen such appetites and gusto and just absolutely love for food. And food was the center of every day. It was the center of every lunchtime. It was the center of every evening. I mean, and I think it's the happiness and the love that goes into food that, for me, keeps it healthy for you.
Yes.
It's a big part of it. It's the attitude of not being in guilt, not being in fear and shame and all of those things, but being in love and joy and feeling that sense of, this is nurturing, it's family, it's community, it's just, it's everything that's good. So.
Yes, and all of that is so important. So give me an example of a meal that you would love to have. Give me an example of just a lovely meal and what is part of that meal.
Yeah, so I look at the moment, for the last sort of 7 years, I've pretty much been vegetarian. So I guess my sort of meal is really the simplicity of beautiful ingredients. So it's just like a simple pomodoro sauce that's prepared from scratch, slow cooked. It's got beautiful olive oil. It's it's got everything that goes with it. The best quality parmesan. It's, you could do shavings of truffle, things like that, just to liven it up. But it's what goes into the process of creating it.
That's beautiful.
That makes it delicious. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the goal for everybody, is to find a way of creating foods that you love and that the food loves you back.
Yeah.
Right? The food loves your body back, and it's going to love your brain back.
Yeah.
And yeah, having a colorful plate full of fruits or vegetables and a home cooked sauce, that sounds amazing. Who wants to give another, and then sharing it with people? That's the other very important component. Steve.
Well, what I wanted to add to what Marley's just said, to enjoy a food as opposed to deprive yourself of it on a regular basis, because it's no good in quotes. The other thing is moderation and balance. I don't have to have ice cream all the time, just an occasional thing, but I know that it may not be the best for me, but I can balance it with an exercise, 1 hour on the treadmill, something of that sort, to moderate that kind of stuff. So I cannot deprive myself of good food. I grew up in a family where my mother was a great cook and all her sisters were great cooks on my father's side of the family. So I love to eat. I don't eat to live. I love to eat. But again, as you get older, a little bit more, it's not good for you, blood pressure wise, weight wise. And so we've actually started to become vegetarians. I don't eat any meat anymore, fish a bit. But I, again, it's the colorful part of it. I know it's healthy, and it's the color. It's got to be colorful, and also lots of different kinds of tastes, not only sweet and sour and bitter and whatever, but crunchy, and those kinds of things that really adds to it, that are really make it special.
Nice, very nice. So, and there's so many things that you make me want to talk about, but again, I don't want to do all the talking myself. I want to ask you, who else loves ice cream? Put up your hand if you love ice cream. In moderation, as Steve said. What do you love about ice cream?
I love for me, it's the breaking the chocolate layer and getting into the ice cream.
So that feeling of biting into it and getting that from the crunchy to the cold, soft, melty. That's very nice. That's so interesting. Who else? Yes, Maria.
I love ice cream, but only good ice cream. So that's how I get around it. I don't like the not so good ice cream. We have a place in town that makes homemade gelato, and then it's really worth it.
Nice.
I can savor it.
It's because you can savor it.
Yeah, just kind of like enjoy it and really feel like it's a treat.
Nice. And so I want to ask you, why does ice cream feel like a treat?
This is probably like history. As kids, we got ice cream was a treat. So maybe a lot of it is, I guess, familiarity and memories.
Yes. And so that's what I wanted to touch on, is that there's so many foods that we think of as treats that don't necessarily treat us well, but they are treats. But what's really treating us well about that food is the memory that comes with it. Or the thought that comes with it, that we're giving ourselves a reward. And so then we're like, it's an expression of love towards ourselves. Or if we're giving that ice cream to our children, it's like an expression of love towards our children, which I find fascinating. Yes. Maria.
I was just going to say that you can actually, I think you can taste the love. You can taste when something's been prepared with that care, that attention, that selection of ingredients. I swear you can taste the difference. There's Kingston is a really foodie town, and there's some restaurants that I go to because I know that I can really taste the difference. And there's some that I don't know what they do back in that kitchen, but I don't want to eat their stuff.
Yeah, that's such an interesting observation. That makes a lot of sense. Allison, you're...
I think Steve just raised something about texture. Apparently, part of why chocolate is so enjoyable is because of the texture of it. And maybe the same is with ice cream and some other things. But food manufacturers sure know how to hook you.
They sure do. Yes,
Or me. Let me talk about me. They sure know how to hook me.
and us. And so I would like to add to that that, you know, with as science has advanced and as we have more and more innovation, some of those innovations are fantastic for us, and some of those innovations are actually harmful, right? And one of the innovations is the ability to scan our brains and study our brains, which is being useful for lots of medical applications, but it's also very useful for marketing applications. And so the large food companies are hiring brain scanning experts in order to identify what types of advertising are going to turn on our emotional part of our brain. And now they're creating marketing campaigns based on the brain imaging studies that they're doing with their consumers. So I think advertising has also become way more powerful than it's ever been in the past, even if we're not fully aware of it. Even if we think we can resist advertising, it's very powerful. And it's so unfortunate that these companies don't have our health as their priority at all, which is why we have to go back to those three elements. It's like you have to prioritize it because no one else is going to prioritize it for you.
Yeah, maybe maybe just to speak into that, because
please.
It's yeah, I mean, my job was sensory, so I tasted and smelled for a living. That's what I did for decades.
Yeah, tell us.
The problem is that if things don't taste good, it doesn't matter if they're better for you, people will not choose them.
Yes.
And that is always the dilemma that you're in the food industry, is because obviously the work that I was doing was from a sensory point of view, is to understand what makes something preferred over something else. And if you take out the fat, or if you take out the sugar, or if you take out something that is deemed to be not so good for you, the type of fat, then people reject it. And they don't reject it necessarily at an intellectual level. They say, oh yeah, this is great because it's better for me. And do they go back and buy it the next time? No, they don't. So again, I go back to this thing is you've got to teach them to love their food and to eat a variety so that they're covering all bases, but not be getting obsessed with the ice cream, for instance. So, but that was always the dilemma that I was in, also at a moral and ethical level, to say, at what level are we influencing people? And studies that they've done on this, the preference for sweetness, is that everybody has that. It's how we're born.
Yes.
The problem with things that have sweetness taken out and have empty calories is that the body is not fooled. So you go and you drink a diet drink, and half an hour later, I need something else, and I drink another diet drink. And you see these people that have this total fixation with drinking these diet drinks. The body is not fooled into thinking it's getting the energy, because it isn't.
Yeah.
So you drink the drink, the body says, oh yeah, I've had something sweet, I've satisfied that need for energy, which is what the body is looking for, and the brain. And then at the end, you set up this addictive sort of cycle, because the body is still looking for the energy that comes from nothingness. And so that for me was an interesting study. They've done a lot of work in Italy on what happens in the neurology of that addiction.
Yeah, exactly. This is really interesting. One thing about the taste of food. One is that, yes, we all have a preference for sweetness because we evolved in an environment where when there were fruits on the trees, we better eat as many of those as possible, because they're only on those trees for a very short period of time, and then they don't come back for a whole year, right? So our bodies evolved to crave that so that we have as much of those nutrients as possible, because we're not going to get them all year. But now that sweetness is over available to us. It's too easy to get access to. The other thing about the tasting good is that our taste buds actually adapt to whatever we get used to eating, right? So if we get used to eating sweet things on a regular basis, our taste buds expect that all the time, and we don't feel satiated if we don't get that. But the good news is that the cells on our tongue and our taste buds regenerate every 2 weeks. So you have brand new taste buds every 2 weeks. So if you go for 2 weeks where you're like, well, for 2 weeks, I'm just gonna eat whole foods, lots of vegetables, some fruits, and maybe a smaller amount of proteins, and I'm gonna stay away from all processed foods and all refined sugars, your taste buds will adapt to that and will start to enjoy the taste of broccoli and the taste of spinach. Yes,
Jeannie, a
Steve.
question. Taste buds to me are just receptors, for something, and then they relay that to the brain, which interprets what it is. And the brain is not regenerated every 2 weeks. So I want to just question, not negate, but question what you're saying. To me, it's passive. The brain, again, the fact that you have new receptors in the brain, receptors in the tongue, doesn't mean anything. It's the brain that says, I remember this stuff. I want more of it, even though I've been deprived of it for 2 weeks. Your thoughts about that?
I would say that it's definitely both, because your taste buds do matter to your brain. They are sending a message to your brain that does have some degree of power.
I'll yield to that. Okay.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, I think what you said earlier was that the memories are associated with the foods and what that means to you. So what is the meaning behind that? And, in times of crisis and stress and that, what do people do? They go back into childhood, they go back into cocooning, and that also goes back into their food. That's
definitely. Sure. Yes,
Yeah.
Anna wants to speak, and I'll listen as well.
Yeah, I had a question around that actually, because I think it's fascinating that that aspect of knowing what is good for your brain, wanting to be brain healthy, and the in between. You know what I mean? Like is it harder as your day progresses to maintain that discipline, let's say? And I'm using that word loosely because it has a lot of connotation, but that force of will, let's say, right?
Yeah.
And then what about your environment? If you're not in a vacuum and you're surrounded by other people who may have different food choices, then how do you do that? And is it stress level as well, which ties back to the brain and your brain health, but not from a food perspective, from like a mental health perspective, right?
Yeah.
So I'm fascinated by how everything is connected, right?
It's so connected. And what we haven't touched on yet is that the brain is not an organ on its own. It's so closely tied to every part of our body. And the gut, as you might have heard, some of you, the most recent science is showing that there's basically a second brain in our guts, and that the health of our gut really has an impact on our mental health and our cognitive health as well. And by healthy gut, it means having a diversity of bacteria in our guts. And that diversity of bacteria is it's damaged by the amount of sugar and alcohol that we are exposed to, and simple carbs and that kind of stuff, and lack of fiber from vegetables and fruits. That all damages our gut bacteria, which then has an impact on our brain health for sure. The other thing that I want to say about what you were saying about, does it progress? Does the discipline or the willpower becomes weaker as the day progresses, or as you become stressed or overwhelmed? It comes back to how strong your why is, which is how strong is your desire to prioritize your brain health. So I've been coaching people on developing awareness around their relationship to food, and helping them move away from using willpower to choose what to eat and what not to eat, and instead to develop like really strong relationships to healthy food, and to start to develop a lower interest in the unhealthy foods, but every person making their own choices. It's about people being able to consciously make choices, because so many of our choices around food are just automatic and are just like, I'm stressed, I just grab this. And I've been working with people who are cancer survivors, and because they're cancer survivors, they've already been so close to the end of life and to the end of having full health, that they are extremely motivated to prioritize their health. And that motivation comes through. So it goes right back to the, how much are you prioritizing your health? Allison.
Jenny, it just struck me, and it's so obvious now that I've written it down, that eating it's emotional, it's physical, it's social, it's spiritual, it's ethical. There's so many aspects to it, and it's something that pervades in all our lives, and we, I think, are pretty much unaware of it.
Yeah.
It's so powerful.
It is. This is why I'm in love with this topic, because it's something we do every day, and it affects so many things about our life. And you said it perfectly.
And I'm curious to know, like animals, do animals have, I know certain pets and dogs get eating issues, but are humans the only ones that have got this complex relationship with food?
That's a great question, and I don't have a knowledgeable answer to it, but I have my guess that probably animals who are in zoos and who we know have mental health problems. We know that there are animals with depression when they're kept in captivity. I bet they're developing food issues as well, but I don't know much more than that. Such a good question.
Okay.
You know, Ginny, I'm just thinking of one thing. We grew up around the kitchen table. Every conversation that we had in our family, and what Allison is saying, the social aspects, it is so tremendously social for me that it's beyond anything else I need. I don't really care if the food doesn't even taste good, as long as I'm eating with someone, and it makes the food even more tasty when I'm having good conversation.
Yeah, who else can relate to that? A little, okay, Anna not so much, but everyone else did.
I think it's just because I left home when I was like very young, like 16, 17. And then if you go to another country and the traditions are different and your family's not there, and like it's a different relationship with food. And now I'm finding it challenging when there are so many electronics available and so many other distractions, that it's so hard to sit with children at a table and have a conversation. So it's something that I have to relearn, I guess, right?
Yeah. I have some other questions that I was thinking of asking. Let's see. Are any of you interested in understanding more around risk factors and what risk factors impact brain health as you're aging? I see some nodding.
Absolutely. As some of us are aging faster than others here.
Yes.
Some of us are at a different aging stage.
Exactly.
And then maybe if we dive into the what is good, because we dived into sugar and alcohol quite a bit, and I'm just wondering, okay, so what's the other side of the coin for that?
Absolutely. Yes,
you.
we'll get to that. Okay, so in terms of risk factors for brain health problems, and by brain health problems, I'm talking about like cognitive decline, memory issues, or development of dementia or Alzheimer's, and also mental health. So I'll just quickly go over, there's basically 11 key risk factors. And this comes from the work of Dr. Daniel Amen, who is a brain specialist who has mental health clinics all around the US and who does brain imaging, and all his research around food and lifestyle is paired with the brain imaging work that he does, where he studies brains, and he has actually been able to show that by changing lifestyle, you can improve someone's brain health even after it's already declined. So there's no age limit to when you take care of your brain to the maximum. So the first one is blood flow. is increasing it, or the risk factor would be if you don't have good blood flow because you either have high blood pressure or constricted arteries and that sort of thing. So you've probably already heard lots about how like sugar, processed foods, a diet that's too high in meat, especially lower quality meat, will create blood flow issues and you know, blood pressure issues and so forth. Another risk factor is when you stop learning, when you stop doing something that engages your brain. And I think this is obvious to all of you. Another one is inflammation, which is related to blood flow. But if you have inflammation, internal inflammation in your body, it's likely that you have internal inflammation in your brain, and that constricts blood flow, which also leads to the early death of brain cells. Genetics can be a risk factor, but again, it's usually only 20% of the risk factors is related to genetics. And more, we're beginning to understand that even if you're genetically prone to something like dementia or Alzheimer's or some form of cancer, those genes can be turned on or off depending on your environment and your lifestyle. Head injuries. So if you've had severe or numerous head injuries in your lifetime, that will affect your brain health. And again, you can help your brain recover if you have had those brain injuries. It's not like you're doomed. There's things you can do. Another one is toxins, exposure to toxins. So things like fumes, if you've worked in a factory and you've been exposed to a lot of fumes, or in construction, or different types of toxin exposure. Another one is your gut, the gut of your health, because it determines the health of your brain. So again, how much of a diversity of microorganisms you have living in your gut. So think about it this way: you're not just your body, you are actually hosting millions of microorganisms that live inside you. And when you're eating, you're not just feeding yourself, and you're not just creating energy for your own body and your own brain, you're actually feeding that microorganism as well. And so it's almost like you have this like dependent inside of you. It depends on you. You have to take care of it. And Anna will talk about what it is that helps it for sure. So that's related to mental health. And around mental health, so again, risk factor related to mental health is if you have lots of negative self-talk. And so a brain specialist that I really like, that I've learned a lot from, is called Jim Quick. And he talks about killing ants. And ants are automatic negative thoughts. The A is for automatic, the N is for negative, the T is for thoughts. So everyone has to be killing their ants. We all have them, and that's perfectly normal, but they're rarely ever based on reality. So we need to question them and say, okay, I'm having this self-deprecating thought, or this like really pessimistic or fear-based thought. Is it really based in some truth? Is there really evidence for me to be thinking this? In most cases, there isn't. We're just prone to having some automatic negative thoughts, and we need to replace them with gratitude, replace them with positive thinking, and so forth. Not pretend that we're not having them, acknowledge them, work through them, write them out if you need to write them out to get them out of the way, and then have a gratitude practice, or have a meditation practice, have something that helps you replace those thoughts with positive thoughts. The other one is infection. So if you have different types of infections, they can put you at a higher risk of having brain decline. Another one is neurohormone abnormalities. So if your hormones go out of balance, which again is often diet related, often lifestyle related, or lack of exercise can also put your hormones out of balance, and that can also put you at risk. Diabetes is known to be one of the precursors for dementia and Alzheimer's, and actually dementia is now starting to be called type 3 diabetes. because it's so strongly connected to insulin resistance and overconsumption of sugar. And the last one is sleep. If you don't get enough sleep, then your brain doesn't regenerate, it doesn't fix things up, it doesn't do the repair it needs to do overnight, and that's also going to put you at a higher risk. They're pretty common sense, the risk factors. And okay, so going back to Anna's question and passing it off to you again, I know most of you already know what's good for you. So we've talked about the importance of prioritizing the brain. We've talked about the things that we would want to have less of. And let's talk about the things we should be having more of. What are they? Marlise, I think you already are onto it.
I'm on the path.
Tell us what you see as the good for the brain.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've come back to learning again, so that's a big. That's been such a joy to start studying again. And it's really, I mean, just to speak into the space of inflammation and diabetes as well, is that sugar, whether we like it or not, when it goes high, it takes us into a space of inflammation. So the automatic response in the body it sets up an inflammation in everybody always. So it's not like, okay, maybe today, maybe not tomorrow, but so just that you're aware of that, and that is unfortunately sort of linked into the diabetic cycle. So yeah, so that's just to highlight that fact, is that those two sort of work together. Yeah, but I think for me, you know, I've started going into this a new way of eating, which definitely makes you feel lighter. There's a lightness to eating a vegetarian diet, and also looking at a daily meditation practice has really helped me a lot. So you tipping a lot of these, you know, points.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, you're definitely on a really good path. Who else would share something? Allison.
One is I try to eat close to the source, so keep things as unrefined as possible. Fresh, keep them fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, and I don't eat any meat products.
Cool. Yeah, definitely whole foods. That's the term that I often use, is whole foods as close to the source as possible. Maria?
I was going to say positive emotions, laughter, deep connections with people, that sense of, you know, peace in your heart, and that sense of, you know, that you are a part of a greater, you know, universe, or part of a greater community. I was recently listening to someone who said that there's some research saying that, you know, there's some heart brain cells that actually, so your heart actually tells your brain what to do in terms of how it feels, rather than we always think our brain tells everything else what to do.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm sure there's a multi-way connection among all of the organs in our body. Nice.
Physical exercise, I know, is really important.
Yes, definitely. And that's also really important for our immune system, to activate our immune system. Steve, you have something to add.
Yeah, you know, the ultimate filter for me in terms of knowing what I shouldn't do for my brain is the belief that it allows me to see beauty. It allows me to see the most precious things in my life. And without it, I couldn't go on. Now, about maybe 10 years ago, someone took my blood pressure. It was mildly elevated. And they said that, you know, you want to bring this back to normal, because every time your heart beats, it's pushing into this increased pressure. And it's going to be beating thousands and million times before you die. And you want to make that easy for that beautiful heart to not push into that pressure. And that immediately said, I want to live more healthy. without taking medications. The same thing with my brain. If you truly believe that that brain is a beautiful part of you, you want to do whatever you want to do. And then it's no ice cream, it's no inflammation, it's no obesity, it's less in your diabetes, it's doing all those things. But you have to be absolutely convinced that you want to preserve and embrace this precious thing called the brain.
Yes. So well said. Thank you, Stephen. So true. Beth?
Yeah, so and maybe we're speaking to my point with everything that we're saying, but how does moderation fit into this? Because I find that's a challenge for me. You know, and I don't know, I'm sure there's a lot of emotion attached to it, and I would have to break it all down, but there, you know, I can definitely eat well beyond full, well beyond satiation. I just keep going. So understanding moderation for me, I think, would be really helpful.
Well, I think in that case, what you're saying makes me think of the fact it's more understanding what type of hunger you're trying to satiate. Because so the founder of the coaching program that I use as the methodology to help people shift their relationship with food, he talks about there being 5 different types of hunger, actually 6. One of them is hydration hunger. So your body will send you hunger signals when what it really wants is water. And that is because when we evolved, we couldn't carry water bottles with us around everywhere. We didn't have access to running clean water. And we would get our water from eating vegetables and fruits. And so the signal for thirst is actually very similar to the signal for hunger. And a large percentage of the population is chronically dehydrated because we don't realize how much water we truly need. And because the majority of people are not eating enough fruits and vegetables to get water from their food. And they're having drinks like caffeine that also contributes to the dehydration. So hydration hunger is one major one. And if your body's not hydrated, you're going to keep feeling hungry no matter how much you eat. Another one is nutrition hunger. And so that is your body getting all the nutrients, the whole variety of nutrients that it needs. And if it's not, if you keep feeding it the same kind of food day after day, it's going to be lacking nutrients. We really need diversity, and we need nutrient-rich food. So Anna, nutrient-rich food is really tons of vegetables and fruits and whole foods. And then it's up to you, it's up to choice whether you're going to have protein from meat or fish or beans and legumes. And that's a whole other topic that we could talk about separately. But the nutrition hunger is another one. And often people are overeating but undernourished when it comes to nutrition. Another one is hunger for variety, which is very connected to the nutrition hunger, but it's almost like it's a signal that's like, well, okay, we've had nutritious food, but it's been the same for the last 5 days. We need variety. And that's a way that the body has of ensuring that we're getting the whole spectrum of vitamins and minerals and everything that it needs. So those are the real hungers. And then there are 3 hungers that are more, you can refer to them as fake hungers. One of them is emotional hunger. So are you eating because of the memory that it brings back to you, is of the sensation, because it makes you feel loved, it gives you a sense of connection? So then you're truly hungry for that sense of connection or that feeling of love, but your body is sending you the signal of just eat, and it will feel better. And it doesn't really, it might feel better temporarily, but then that feeling is going to come back up. Or boredom. Boredom is another emotion, right? We also eat out of boredom. And then, which is fine if you're eating nutritious things, but then it's not as good as if you're eating things that are damaging you. Another one is the blood sugar hunger. So our body wants to maintain a certain level of sugar, but it doesn't have to be refined sugars. It doesn't even have to be fruits, because our body turns everything into glucose ultimately. So the problem is that because we are used to having too much sugary stuff, sweet stuff available to us, we have those spikes in glucose in our blood levels. And so that spike makes us hunger. Like we might just have some food that increases the spike, we're fine, but then there's a big drop in the glucose levels because it's not sustained energy that we're getting from our food. So that's another one. And then the last one, I think I'm on number 6,
Yeah.
is the empty stomach feeling. And again, we evolved to be able to binge on food when food is available. So our stomach can go from being this size to expanding to this size. And it's built that way. It's an amazing evolutionary advantage that we have. But the problem again is that we're used to living with our stomach expanded. And so then when it's not full, it's expanded and it needs to have some time to go back to its normal size. But because we feel it's expanded and it's empty, we think we have to fill it up. And we think
Is that a
need to
physiological thing, Jenny? Does it actually expand?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes, it actually
wow.
expands. Yeah, definitely.
And whose work is this? You said at the 6 types of hunger. Whose work is
Eric Edmeades. Eric with a C.
Yeah.
Edmeades.
Thanks.
No problem.
Many, many years ago, I remember a study that showed that if you had a bunch of babies in front of different kinds of food, I suppose it was milk and chicken and who knows what, they would naturally pick the ones that were healthiest for them to survive. And I don't know if that was ever proven or recreated or whatever, but your thoughts on that?
There's a few different studies actually where they've done that, and the results can be completely contradictory. It really depends. If a child, and it depends on the age as well, if a child tries milk chocolate, they're going to get hooked on milk chocolate and they're going to choose that. That's going to be their preference, no doubt. Now, but that's once they've tried it. What is true is that children are intuitive eaters. And so they know they're better in touch with when they're full and when they don't need any more food. And we have a tendency to feed them more and more and more because we think quantity is what they need. And so we ruined that pretty early on with our children, unfortunately, by making them finish their plates.
We have a little 2-year-old, my daughter, and I'm seeing her on FaceTime almost every day. Our daughter Julie shows up when she's eating, and she's eating broccoli, and she's eating spinach, and she's eating squash, and I'm saying, yuck.
No, don't say yuck to her.
I know. I'm just kidding, but because I'm looking at that stuff, and where does she get that? And she's drinking water all the time, as opposed to these fruit drinks, which every other kid in the world does. And I'm saying, and it's never daughter, and I'm saying, Julie, how did you do this? This is fantastic. And and I'm saying, wow, if she could just be sheltered for a long enough period of time that the brain can be hardwired to not want sweets, we will have made a difference in this little girl's life.
Yeah.
Whether it happens or not.
Steve, I have a country story. Somebody who didn't let their children eat sweets for about 4 years, and the child went to a birthday party and discovered chocolate. And from there on, the child actually ended up with emotional issues because he felt so deprived.
Wow.
So, different story.
Yeah. Children and their relationship to food is yet another big topic that I'm also really interested in as a mom myself. But good for her, Steve. It sounds like she's off to a really good start.
Yes, may I ask a question, Jenny?
Yeah.
You're dealing with a lot of cancer patients. Are you finding that there's a history of nutrition that sort of you can follow and people can track what the effects have been, or is it just that in the changing of that nutrition going forward that you see the difference?
I can say that it's the changing in the nutrition and going forward that we see the difference, but personally.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of studies that are linking lifestyle and diet to the onset of cancer. But that's not my personal experience. That's just the studies that I know are out there.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense. I'm actually collaborating with a cancer doctor
Nice.
And so she's more in touch with all the studies and that part of it than I am. I'm more the coach and the one that understands emotional eating.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
We're gonna wrap up soon, just because it's the hour, and I think some of us want to get out into the sun that we have today. But Steve, you have your hand up before we wrap up.
Well, you know what? I want to just make one comment. My wife actually introduced me to a Dr. Greger. He's on Greger, and he's absolutely fantastic. He's an internist. He's a very, very funny guy, and he's written a number of books on how to live longer and how to diet without really dieting. And he has these little 3 or 4 minute things that he does on reviews of the literature. He's absolutely fantastic, and you can get it on nutritionfacts.org, nutritionfacts.org. If you go to that and listen to any of his things, put in onions, put in celery, put in asparagus, put in whatever you want, and he has a little bit, it's only 3 or 4 minutes. The guy is funny, he's supportive, he's never negative against people. I think it absolutely a great source, and he can probably put down cancer-causing things. He has an answer for that, and he's very, very specific and quotes literature too. But it's all in 3 or 4 minutes. So
awesome.
So may I recommend that to people?
Thank you. I'm going to look it up for sure. Awesome. Thank you. I just want to invite a couple of closing thoughts. Like, what has become more clear to you over the last hour? What has been an insight or something that's become clear to you that you'd like to share with everyone?
Just the way that you've presented, Jenny, you've just done it so clearly, and a lot of it I might have known it, but just writing it down and listening to you and listening to the questions has been so helpful. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to say that for me, the 6 different types of hunger, that's really interesting to me to I think the biggest insight I have there is getting some variety. I live by myself. I'm isolated, alone. It's really easy for me to make, one pot of something and eat that all week. So I think understanding that there everything around that I need to diversify. I need to change that up. I could be my body's looking for different nutrition, all of that. So
yeah,
that was very helpful.
Yeah, and you don't have to have tons of variety within a week, but you do have to have it within the year.
Okay, yeah. That's good to know, because I am the one pot wonder.
Yeah, and that's okay. You can have that base and then add some variety every day in like the side dishes or whatever, and then make sure that you're creating variety throughout the year. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this. It's been great.
Good. My pleasure.
Jeannie, I'm going to second Allison's thought. You did it in a typically Jeannie Santos way. Very, very forgiving of people who didn't know something, and in always a spirited and educational way. And the realization I got is, just like I'm taking care of my heart from pumping into, and I want to do that by decreasing salt and whatever, the realization is that my brain is something terribly special, and I want to protect that too. So it can still see the beauty of a beautiful spring day and take a breath and enjoy the warmth and loveliness of it. Yeah.
I'm so happy for you. Thank you, Steve. Good. Any other closing remark? Yes, Marlies.
Yeah, I think just a reminder, thanks for all the reminders, because it's the sort of everyday stuff that we just don't pay attention to. So it's the awareness that's always good. I thought it was really interesting, the points on things like head injuries and toxins and infections and things that you don't necessarily think about. I mean, I didn't it's not a conscious thing for me. So thank you for bringing that awareness. And I guess for me, it's just, it's our relationship with food and the love that makes it work, makes better choices. We make better choices. So thank you for all this.
Awesome. My pleasure again. Yes, Maria.
I was just going to say that I appreciate the focus on that we have choice and we can be more mindful of our choices, because I think you're right. Sometimes it just, for myself, that it becomes more patterns and habits and routines. So thank you for that awareness.
Awesome. Allison, one more.
Sorry, one more. I read something beautiful, that if you have a healthy body, you live longer, but you also, meaning that you're healthy until the point where you actually die, and then you die. It's not a long suffering death.
Yeah, that's what we all want, don't we?
Yeah.
That's the ideal. Very nice. Thank you. Anna, any closing comment or something that's become more clear to you?
Yeah, I think the 6 types of hunger, like I had not heard of all 6, I'd heard of a couple.
Mhm.
And then having all of the risk factors laid out, and then if you want to know more, these are people who are doing research and you can look into it, is really helpful as well. And if you ever do one for children, I totally sign up as well. So yeah, thank you.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you, Anna. That's great. We can talk more about that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Wonderful start to the day. Thank you.
Good. Enjoy
Thank
your
you.
Sundays. Mwah.
Yes. Bye-bye. Thank you.